I'm just going to give you some tips on how I get the edible part of a bunya nut out. This is from a cone which I picked up yesterday lying under a tree. So it's a mature and ripened bunya nut cone, and these are the seeds that are removed from the middle of the cone. They're in little locules around a sort of fleshy casing with a spiny bit pointing towards the outside. And they're fairly easy to remove once it gets to the ripe stage, but even at the unripe stage you can remove them. So what I've done with these nuts, I've boiled them in water, hot water, brought them to boil and then simmered them for 30 minutes or so. Then I pour the water off, put cold water on, leave it overnight. So what happens when I come back today is the nuts have started to split, or most of them have. As you can see here, this is one of the nuts started to split at the top. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's one part that's bigger than the other. So this bottom part of the shell is smaller, the upper part is bigger. And this is why I've developed this technique of getting the flesh out rather than some of the other techniques. One of the common techniques is that you put a sharp knife down the middle of this split here, and you just work it down very firmly and split it in half. The problem I have with that technique is because they're uneven in size, sometimes the knife actually slips off to the side. So these are the tools that I use. This is a crab scissors. This is my cleaver, which I very rarely use, unless to use the blunt end of it if nuts are really hard. But these are the three main instruments I use. There's a very sharp knife. These are bone cutting scissors, and as you see, they've got fairly fine tips, and they're quite useful and quite sturdy for using this. These are made by Fox Run, but I'm sure there's lots of these around. And my oyster shucking knife and my oyster shucking glove. It's got metal weave in it and very useful for doing something like this. So with these ones that have already started to split, I get my bone cutting scissors, and you just slide them in underneath, and just about 1 to 2 millimeters, just work your way along and right down to the curved base, the thicker curved base. So this is going through what we call the pericarp. And there's two parts of the pericarp. There's this harder part, and you'll see inside there's or you can see inside these ones, there's a darker, thinner part of the pericarp that's somewhat fibrous. And they're all the bits that you need to remove. So we're heading down the other side of this nut that's already started to split, using our bone cutting scissors. And if you take it down, make sure you only go a couple of millimeters at a time, because if you push it too hard, the scissors are going to damage your nut. And you can use these ones, which are a little bit thinner, as you can see these ones here, but they're usually better for the greener nuts, and you can sort of put them in and work around with those. But usually the greener ones like this, you need something more sturdy. So once you've got it down both sides, then it's simply a matter of just opening it up. And then I use my oyster shucking knife, and I go in under, and just as you would shuck an oyster, just sort of loosen it, and you'll see it comes out quite nicely. And then I use my sharp knife to cut it in half. Just be a bit careful, they are a little bit fragile after they've been boiled. And you'll see here's the seed in the middle. This is where germination occurs to get your next plant. And there's your half a shell of bunya nut. Probably half shells are the best, particularly if you're using them in a decorative purpose, like putting them on a pie or a cake or something like that, or canning them. I actually plan to put these in rum for about 6 months, and the rum infuses into the bunya nut, and then they can be used for desserts, or even you can candy them and use them as lollies. Now, sometimes you'll find that some bunya nuts won't open up, and yeah, this one here hasn't opened up in the process, and some of them float as well, and some people say the floating ones you just need to discard because they've got nothing in them. I find about half the floating ones have have something in them. So I open them up anyway, and if they haven't opened up, I just pinch the end with my my bone cutting scissors, and then do the same process. Just work your way along. Sometimes the water's already got into them, and they're not edible, but sometimes they're just a little bit older and they've shrunk up a little bit, and so there's a bit of air inside. This one's still okay, but this one, for example, has started to decay. So this one's okay. Sometimes I'll split like that. As they're a bit older, they're a bit more fragile, but same technique. Just use the oyster knife, just get in, just loosen it off, and you'll see it pop out. There we go. Now, see, this is the fibrous bit, the inner part of the pericarp, and that's the flesh or the mesocarp, and the little seed inside is the endocarp, as a sort of generic way of describing the different piece of the nut. But it's this mesocarp which is the edible portion, this white creamy portion. It's quite glossy white before it's been boiled, and it gets a more or bright white when it's before it's been boiled. And once it's been boiled, it gets a more marbled, creamy look about it. And try and get it off a bit of this inner part of the pericarp. And there's the seed in the middle. That's where germination will occur, and that just flips out. They can be eaten. A lot of people don't like them. Once it gets to the shooting stage, I've got one here that's just started to shoot, the bunya nut loses a little bit of its flavour and becomes just a source of flour, of starch. But if you get them before this stage, you can certainly eat the inner part. Some people warn against it, that it can cause abdominal upset, but talking to some Aboriginal people, they say they don't eat that many of them in any one go to actually cause them tummy upset, and that probably if they're used to eating it, their alimentary system's probably got adapted to it. So here's the other half of that one that I took apart before. So you still actually have some flesh even in the ones that float, and I find that in about half of them. So hopefully you find that a useful technique, using oyster glove, oyster knife, sharp knife, and bone cutting scissors, maybe a cleaver if you've got the really hard ones. If you've got early green ones, the little scissors like crab scissors or any fine scissors can work. The main trick is to work slowly, 1 to 2 millimeters at a time. Don't try and do a whole heap at a time, because you'll either damage it inside or you'll damage your hand. Good luck.